Australians will be looking to the Reserve Bank for some Christmas joy when it meets next Tuesday, with new figures showing the economy is virtually crawling to a halt. The latest economic data shows annual growth to September of just 0.8%. Now, outside of the pandemic, that is the lowest rate of growth since the 1990s recession.
It's mainly government spending keeping things afloat, putting pressure on the major parties to boost business while reining in stubbornly high inflation in next year's election. Let's head to political reporter Tom Lowry at Parliament House. Tom, Jim Chalmers says he's still confident the government's steering the economy in the right direction.
Yeah, the Treasurer is arguing, Emma, that the government can both push inflation down and support the economy at the same time, that there is a narrow path that can be walked there. These economic figures yesterday did come as a bit of a surprise to many. They were weaker than many had expected. Quarterly growth coming in at just 0.3% and annual growth at 0.8%. As Michael mentioned, the lowest rate of growth since that recession in the 1990s outside of the pandemic. State and federal government is state and federal government spending, is what's keeping the economy afloat at present. That is raising questions as to whether that spending coming out of those state and federal coffers is worsening inflation, keeping it higher than it should be for longer. Mark Butler, the health minister and government frontbencher, was asked about this earlier this morning. He's pointed to the economic situation abroad to illustrate where Australia is at present.
3/4 of developed economies have suffered negative growth at some point over the past 18 months. Australia hasn't, in part because of our very strong focus on getting that balance right between the fight on inflation, delivering targeted cost of living relief to Australian households, while also keeping an eye on the risks to economic growth.
The big question, Emma, is of course when the Reserve Bank might move on the cash rate. Of course, the Reserve Bank is meeting next week. There are no expectations, sadly, that Reserve Bank will move next week. The likeliest early first date for a rate cut is probably looking around April or May next year.
OK, Tom Lowry, thank you.
The daughters of a Perth grandmother jailed for 6 years for importing meth into Japan have vowed to continue the fight to bring her home. Donna Nelson claims a love scammer tricked her into carrying the bag with the drugs hidden after she was caught at Tokyo's Narita airport in January last year. Our North Asia correspondent James Oaten has more.
After putting on a brave face, the family of Donna Nelson were finally delivered the devastating news. The Perth grandmother sentenced to 6 years jail for trafficking 2 kilograms of methamphetamine. Now, Donna Nelson says that she picked up this travel case in Laos, believing that her boyfriend that she'd met online needed it as a sample for his business in Japan. And when she took the travel case and arrived, only then was it discovered under a false bottom that there were 2 kilograms of methamphetamine. Now, Ms Nelson has always argued that she is the innocent victim of a love scam, but what the court here has determined is that there were too many red flags that she seemingly ignored or overlooked, that she must have had doubts that what she was involved in was illegal or potentially illegal, and she didn't act on those suspicions. For example, why didn't the boyfriend get the associate to deliver the bag to Japan? Or why did Ms Nelson tell her boyfriend that she didn't want to pick up his bag during a transit? So the court here wasn't really determining if she definitely knew she was trafficking drugs, but rather saying there were simply too many suspicions and doubts that she should have acted on and she should have pulled out of this flight to Japan. Now, the prosecution say Ms Nelson is completely untrustworthy. They wanted her to serve 10 years in jail, but the judge here has determined she's still a victim. She was still coming to Japan to meet someone she had fallen in love with. So they've handed down a 6-year sentence and saying that's a mark of leniency. They've also knocked off 430 days, given time already served. That's also another sign of leniency from the judge. But the family here, they obviously say that Ms Nelson is an innocent victim here, and one extra day in jail is one day too many. So they're going to continue the fight and they are determined to appeal this sentence.
James Oaten reporting there. The New South Wales Premier says a decision by a crossbench and opposition-dominated parliamentary committee to refer him to the state's corruption watchdog is disgraceful and completely unsubstantiated. Last night, the ABC confirmed that a parliamentary committee into the redevelopment of the Rosehill Racecourse has asked for Chris Minns to be investigated over his relationship with one of the key figures behind the project. The referral to ICAC does not mean the Premier is under investigation by the body.
In breaking news, the French Prime Minister Michel Barnier has been ousted by a no-confidence vote. It is the first time the French government has collapsed this way in more than 60 years. The move could plunge one of Europe's biggest economic powers into a much deeper economic crisis.
South Korea's opposition has told the country's president to resign or be impeached after his attempt to impose martial law led to chaos in parliament and protests on the streets. He rescinded the sweeping restrictions just 6 hours after declaring it. Korean media reports the defence minister has offered his resignation and taken responsibility.
The sister of former Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan says her brother is being tortured in prison. Speaking to the ABC program The World, Alima Khan says both she and her brother are being persecuted by the government. She says Mr Khan is being treated worse than other prisoners and was held in a dark cell with no light for 10 days.
I mean, the way they are trying to abuse him, to break him. He said, you can put me in prison for the rest of my life, but I will stand up for what I have fought for the past 30 years.